All right, let's get going. So first of all, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to 2022. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken Cerini. I'm managing partner of Cerini and Associates. And over the last 3 years, we've been providing you, in conjunction with the Nonprofit Resource Hub, the trends that are impacting the nonprofit sector through our trend report. Actually, last year, as Kelly reminded me, last year when I did this trend report, I did it while battling COVID. So, COVID was a big issue at the beginning of last year. It's a big issue today. So as we move through 2021, we started to see some sort of return to normalcy. But unfortunately, as 2021 came to an end, it brought with it a new variant of COVID and a spike in cases. At this point, I don't know of a single person that haven't had someone within their inner circle test positive. I talk to people, and whenever I'm talking to someone, everyone's always telling me, over the last couple of weeks that, someone they know or themselves or someone there has tested positive for COVID. So COVID is still a big thing. And while the Omicron is much more transmissible, it appears that the manifestation of the symptoms is milder for most people than the earlier versions of COVID. But again, obviously, this has brought with it a slew of new regulations that have, among other things, decreased the recommended isolation time from 10 days down to 5, stepped up vaccine requirements for many areas of the state. So really what it's done is, I think it's brought with it a lot more uncertainty. The rules and regulations, people are kind of left out there within the sector trying to figure out what it is they're supposed to be doing. And they're kind of left out there on their own to try to figure some of this out. So while there's regulations, the question really comes down to, do the regulations make sense? Is that what people should be doing? Should they be following those, or should they be, kind of following some other set of rules? I mean, obviously, everybody wants to make sure that they keep their staff safe and that the people that they're working with safe. So again, what is the right answer here? So unfortunately, where does all of this leave the nonprofit sector, the people it serves, and those on the front line providing much needed services? While a myriad of regulations, warning, and advisories have been released, again, I think it's really just left the leadership scratching their heads more and trying to navigate a lot of this stuff in terms of the uncertain risks and stuff on their own. With opinions and attitudes all over the map. I mean, you talk to people, and, I know that we've talked in the past about, this country has gotten a lot more polarized, even over something like, how do you handle COVID? You've got, a bunch of the population who's just kind of fed up with this whole thing, and they really just want to go on with life as normal, or whatever that normal is going to be on a go-forward basis. And you've got others that are really still scared about this. So again, all of that stuff is going to have to be taken into consideration through the decision-making process, which doesn't make nonprofit leadership that much easier. For the most part, life is not necessarily locked down during the most recent COVID wave, with most businesses remaining open. But again, it still has, the Omicron variant has still brought significant disruption to daily life, organizational operations, and continues to impact the already stretched labor force. A lot of people are calling in sick. Most nonprofit organizations don't have enough staff as it is, and this is really just kind of making things worse. Due to vaccination policies, the fleeing of many employees from New York, employees kind of rethinking their lives, and a push for higher wages and more flexible work environment, many nonprofit organizations are still struggling to fill open jobs, especially in the area of lower paid direct care workers. There doesn't seem to be anybody out there looking for jobs. And unfortunately, when it comes to delivering direct services, flexibility isn't always an option or a possibility. Some of the jobs that you have within the workforce, you can do on a more remote basis, but some of the, frontline services really have to be done in person. Again, this has left many nonprofit organizations re-examining their work environments and benefits and trying to determine how to create a model that's kind of fair for everyone. When the new reality is that going forward, policies will need to be as flexible as organizations' work environments. So, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all environment on a go-forward basis. We're going to need to find ways that we can be more flexible with respect to benefits and workload and everything else. With the difficulty in hiring new staff, retention is going to be paramount, as is developing a work environment that is more employee-centric. So that's going to be everybody's goal for 2022. For at least the near term, organizations are going to need to rethink the way they do business. The days of everyone wearing a dozen hats and being responsible for everything are quickly dwindling. Staff are looking for more rewarding experience within the work environment. Staff want to, and that's actually a good thing for the nonprofit sector, because if you think about it, staff are looking for meaning, they're looking for impact. These are all things that you have to offer. The goal now is to try to get, the other components of this, and although it's not the #1 priority for most employees, salaries have to try to come in line with everything else. And I know that's really, really tough in terms of things. This will require nonprofits to strategically look at their business models and find ways to become more efficient and effective. Technology has already been on the rise within the sector over the last 2 years, but technology will become even more important, and it's going to have to be integrated in every aspect of what a nonprofit does: program delivery, systems, back office functions, communication, development. Pretty much everything that the nonprofit sector is working on is going to have to be something that technology is going to come and play with, as well as information. I mean, just how do you gather information? How do you utilize information? So the way I see it, 2022 is going to need to be a transitional year for many nonprofit organizations. However, change won't come quick, and it won't come easy. It will require a new lens, a new thought process, a true understanding of some of the trends that are out there. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Some of those trends that we're seeing, some of the stuff we learned from 2021, and how that's kind of pushing its way into 2022. So again, if anybody has questions as we're going through this, if you can please post the questions to the question and answer. I'll try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. We have an hour and a half together today. And I have a lot of information to go over, so I will try to do my best in terms of trying to go through everything. Okay, so as I said before, the impact of COVID is probably one of the big things that's still on the table, and I think it's going to be a significant issue throughout 2022, or for the main part of 2022. I mean, if you think about it, the coronavirus has already created a lot of isolation and stress within the workforce. There's been an uptick in mental health issues as people feel, as I said, very isolated and stuff. Socialization concerns where people aren't around other people. People are nervous about being around other people. Change in attitude of workers. So, COVID is really going to continue to have a big impact on the sector and on all sectors as we continue to move forward. Again, we have learned that we can operate effectively in a remote environment and in many aspects of the business that we work in. Question now is, how do we keep employees kind of married to our organization, as we talked about before? As we move, employees want a remote workforce, and as we look to try to give them that remote workforce, that has a major impact on things like organizational culture and things like that. So again, how do we, in this new remote world that we live in, I know we've been kind of dealing with this over the last 2 years, but the last 2 years has been what a lot of people have thought has been more of a temporary sort of thing, but we've now learned that this is not temporary. This is not something that's going to go away. A remote workforce, remote flexible work environments, hybrid work environments, they're here to stay. And this is what the new normal is going to look like. So it's really going to be important for us to try to figure out how we're going to work through and keep the employees that we have kind of married to the organization. Also look at how we kind of balance maybe the workforce that we currently have, the employees that we're working with maybe some freelance staff. I think you're seeing also from a trend perspective, a lot more people don't want to be pinned down to a job. They don't want to have kind of a 9 to 5, or they want to have a lot more flexibility. They want to be their own boss. So you're going to see that freelance is going to be on the rise, and it already started in 2021. So organizations are going to have to look to, platforms like Fiverr and things like that for ways to maybe pepper in some freelance work within the workforce that they have. Remote operations have significantly impacted organizational culture, as I mentioned, making it harder to create differentiation between the nonprofit sector, which has always been a little more flexible and a little more caring, and the for-profit world, which has kind of embraced or has needed to embrace the whole flexible workforce. Organizations will need to develop ways to create increased touch points with their staff, especially the remote ones. I mean, again, you want to keep your staff connected to your organization, which means you're going to have to find ways to stay in touch with them. You're going to need to find ways to have daily check-ins and stuff so that you're going to be able to keep them attached. It's going to put a lot more pressure and a lot more impetus on your leadership team and your managers to make sure that they develop meetings, check-ins, social situations, teaching moments, and more, so that the staff don't feel separate or isolated from the organization. Because if a person or if an employee doesn't feel connected to an organization or connected to your business model, then really it comes down to a salary sort of thing. But if people feel they're important, if people feel they're connected, if people feel that there's opportunity and growth and they're getting the teaching that they need and crave, then they're going to be more connected. And it's funny, it's not that they feel as connected anymore to the organization as we kind of break into this remote workforce, and people are dealing more and more within their individual teams and working more one-on-one with their managers and leadership. People are moving away from being more connected to an organization and moving more and more towards being connected to a leader or to a manager or to a team. So those are all things that you have to think about as you're kind of going through all of this and say, how do I provide appropriate training and mentoring to my leadership team in order to have them kind of push all of those soft skills, or learn all of those soft skills to push all that down. Policies will need to be developed that are more flexible than they've been in the past. One size does not fit all anymore. You're going to be in a situation where you're going to have certain employees that are going to have to be on site all the time, and you're going to have other employees that are going to need to be, that are going to look to be remote or more flexible or hybrid. How is that fair? How are you going to handle that within your personnel policies and your employee handbook? Is there certain things that you're going to have to do for the employees that have to show up every day in order to give them an added benefit because they don't have the flexibility? So all of these things are going to need to be considered and kind of worked into the new employee handbook of the future. And that's got to start now. From a cybersecurity perspective, as people are working, we're going to talk a lot more about cybersecurity as we go through this and get into the technology area. But as more and more people are working remotely, the goal now is, again, if this is your new normal, you're going to have to make sure that they have the tools and the technology they need at home where they're working, because you're going to be in a situation where if you're relying upon employees to utilize their own equipment, which a lot of nonprofits did at the very beginning of all of this, and maybe haven't switched. If they're using their own equipment, you're in a situation where maybe some of their equipment is old. Maybe the patches that your IT is putting in place aren't getting down to their home equipment. Maybe their kids are using their machines and they're visiting websites and stuff that they shouldn't be visiting, that are creating viruses that are finding their way into your systems. So it's going to put a lot more pressure on cybersecurity issues. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then again, from a space perspective, I think there's, we have to look at space very differently than we have in the past. Most nonprofit organizations are not going to need the same level of space that they have in the past. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think the space that nonprofits have is going to also have to be flexible. I mean, I think that's the key word for 2022 is flexibility. Flexibility of workforce, flexibility of policy, flexibility of program delivery, flexibility of space. It's all going to come down to that. The other thing is, I know that we're in an environment where it's been very, very difficult to find employees. And again, one of the things that you can do is, if you look at your workforce, figure out what jobs can be done remotely, and then that opens up the whole country and actually the whole world to as a opportunity for employment of people that can work remotely. From a other concerns, I mean, you've got obviously the vaccination policies. I mean, there's been a whole lot of new regulations that have come out with respect to monitoring and tracking, and when can people come back to work? And again, I think really the key here is, every organization is going to have to look at things, talk to other organizations within the industry, and try to figure out how they're going to, first of all, stay on top of all of the changing regulations, and second of all, make sure that as they implement these changing regulations, that ultimately, they're keeping their employees safe, and that's really, paramount here with respect to keeping employees safe, especially when we're already dealing in an environment where, there's not enough staff. And then, we've seen a lot of, because of COVID, a lot of, we're in doing things, oh, we have to go remote again because someone tested positive. And so there's this, inability to gain any real traction and to gain any real sustainable operations because of this herky-jerkiness and this starting and stopping. So again, it comes back to that flexibility. You need to make sure that you have policies, you need to make sure that you have plans and contingency plans, and ways that everybody knows how to pivot almost on a daily basis as things, start and stop and change. And that's going to be important. Everybody's been talking about, and we've heard so much about, the Great Resignation. Between April and September of last year, 19 million US workers quit their jobs. That's a tremendous number of people. So you're in a situation where, there's been this tremendous turnover. There's been this big swing in terms of the pendulum, where in the past, employers could say, hey, you don't like it, there's the door. Not that nonprofits necessarily did that, but that's not the case anymore. I mean, the employees are kind of in control. I don't know how many of you have seen the Amazon commercial that's on, where you have a bunch of people saying, yeah, I want to work 2 days a week, and when I want, and I want you to pay for my college student loans and blah blah blah, and everybody's saying what they want. And then like someone from Amazon comes on and says, you're all hired. And that's kind of the mentality that's out there right now, is that, employees kind of dictate what's happening out there in the marketplace. And it's going to be that way for a while, until we get some, stabilization of the workforce. And that's going to put a lot more pressure also on nonprofit organizations in terms of, some of those frontline workers who, really don't have that necessarily salary parity and stuff, and they're making a lot less. They're making close to minimum wage, and how do you start bringing those up and get to them to a point where they're making a real wage? So again, it's time. I know we're talking about the Great Resignation, but I think it's time for great reflection. Organizations need to reflect on why employees are leaving, and they need to kind of form effective responses. Why are people going? What are people looking for? And what you're finding, like I said, is that employees are reevaluating their careers. They're questioning the way they work. They're questioning when they work, how fulfilling their work is. And again, I think this sets the nonprofit sector up very well, because I think you offer a lot of really true psychic benefit that the for-profit world can't deliver. So what do employees want? What do you need to do in order to attract and keep your employees? Well, obviously, and I've been saying it, and you'll hear it a lot more times today, employees want flexibility. They want autonomy around how and where and when they work. They want to manage their own schedules. And again, that's why I said a lot of people have gone to freelance, just for that reason. They want to make an impact. And who's better to give them that opportunity to make an impact than you guys in the nonprofit sector? They want engagement, they want fulfillment, they want, impactful work. That's what they're looking for. They want continuous feedback, mentorship, and training. So that's something that you want to make sure that you have in place. People want to know where they stand. They want to know what you're expecting from them. They don't want surprises. They want to know they're doing well and where they can improve. And, they want to help in polishing their skills. So again, that's part of what they're looking for. They're looking for communication. I mean, communication in any relationship is important, and an employee-employer relationship is just that. It's a relationship. So, they want to know, how things are going. And I think the biggest complaint you find by employees is that the supervisors lack effective communication. So you need to make sure that your leadership team, provides that proper communication. They're looking for a positive organizational culture. And again, that's been a little bit tougher in a remote environment, but they want to feel happy and satisfied, and that the work that they're doing matters. They're looking for ways to continuously improve on organizational culture, and that's what you should be looking to do. And culture should be visible in practice, so that the employees can kind of feel it. And although it's not necessarily a high priority on the list, they are looking for appropriate compensation. Again, especially with the lower end employees, you need to get those salaries up. That's something that you're going to need to look to find other places to cut, so that you can and to create other efficiencies, so that you can increase some of the salaries that your employees are receiving. And I understand for those of you who are government funded, that becomes very, very difficult, because the government doesn't really like to give you the dollars you need in order to, you're on set budgets. They're not really giving tremendous increases. So it's going to be kind of a difficult challenge and balance for the sector. As I said before, leadership is going to be extremely key in 2022. Strong leadership needs to be flexible. It needs to be empathetic, I should say. So you're in a situation where empathy is going to be kind of the new currency in leadership. You need to kind of be able to connect with your employees, and if you can't connect with your employees, it's going to be a problem. They need to be problem solvers. They need to be teachers, supporters. As I said before, employees are craving that training and stuff. And there needs to be diversity within your leadership team, and whether that be your leadership team in terms of your management team or your board or whatever, but the organizational leaders need to be reflective of your staff and of the people that you work with. Because if you're not reflective of who you're serving and the employees that are working for you, you really don't understand where they're coming from and have a strong grip there. I know that I had mentioned before that you're going to be seeing employment from other parts. You could see employment from other parts of the states, or other states, or from around the world. And somebody posted a question about the tax and employment issues of remote employees. And yeah, I mean, if you do have employees in other states, you're going to have to register your nonprofit within those states. You're going to have to file employment tax returns in those states and everything else. And you're probably going to have to file your 990 equivalent, just like in New York State, you have the Char 500. You're going to have to file the 990 equivalent within those states. And yes, that's a trade-off, and there's going to be additional work involved with that. But again, finding qualified people is going to be kind of even more important. As I mentioned, there's going to be a need to kind of increase salaries. For staff, we're expecting raises of at least 3 to 6%. I know that raises in the past have not been that good, but the raises are going to have to be bigger in 2022. You're especially again with the lower direct care workers. The minimum wage is not going to cut it anymore. A lot of the fast food restaurants and stuff have already started to raise their salaries to $20 plus, and you're going to have to kind of get to that level at least or more in order to try to keep those frontline workers kind of within your organization. And you're going to need to move to an employee-centric approach. Remember, you can't provide services without employees. I mean, if you think about it, most of your budget is made up of staff salaries. So you really need these employees, and it's essential that you have them. So you're going to have to prioritize the people that, make the work that you do possible. And, that means that if you have to try to renegotiate contracts with your funders, which isn't always the easiest thing in the world, if you need to push back on contracts that aren't providing enough administrative support or not providing enough wages for salaries, these are all things that you need to do. And again, at the end of the day, it needs to be a fulfilling experience for employees. So what else is going on? Not only do we have employee shortages, we also have supply chain shortages, and this is a direct result of COVID. I mean, you're in a situation where, because of all the starting and stopping, and because of the lockdowns in some of the other countries, there's been a supply chain shortage, being harder and harder to get the supplies that you need, and the cost of those supplies has gone way up. So we've seen shortages of supplies, and we've seen inflation on top of that. So it's taking longer when you order things, longer timeframes to receive it. So you also have to keep in mind that when you're ordering stuff, you have to keep in mind that it's going to take longer for things to get there because of product shortages, especially in the world of technology. We're seeing tremendous delays in getting technology and equipment that you need. So again, I definitely urge nonprofit organizations to go out there and do an assessment of their needs and start thinking about what their needs are going to be, months before they're looking to implement it, so they can ensure that the orders and they can ensure that the information they need is going to come in. Not the information, but the products they need are going to come in. Increased inflation is also an issue. I mean, if you think about what increased inflation has done, I mean, we're seeing that inflation is about 5 or 6%. So if you're seeing a higher inflation, that means in order for staff to just keep their standard of living, they need to see increases equivalent to the inflationary rate. So as inflation goes up, you really need to provide higher wages to your staff just so that they can stay equal to what their spending patterns are right now. Also, when you have an increase in inflation, the Federal Reserve goes and they increase interest rates. So as you see increased interest rates, the goal there is to try to slow down the economy a little bit. So it drives prices up a little bit more to begin with. But the other thing it does is it drives the stock market down. And, when we're sitting here, we're talking about the stock market. I know that, as nonprofit organizations, some of you have investments, but that's not the most important part of this. The most important part of this is as you see a drop in the stock market, like we've seen the beginning part of this year, that usually does not bode well in terms of donations, because as the stock market continues to drop, people have less money, there's less profitability, and there's less discretionary funds for people to make donations with. So, I think, with all of the growth that we've seen in the stock market, from January 19 through now, you're in a situation that, you're going to see that, I think, some corrections in the market, or continued corrections in the market for at least a portion of this year, until inflation comes under control. And I think it will. And I think by the time we reach, later in the year, as COVID starts to hopefully die down by the second, third quarter, hopefully you'll see some shrinkage in some of the inflationary rates, and hopefully the market will pick back up again. But it's going to be a little bit of a stretch here where things are going to be a little tightened. You have this whole aspect of feast or famine within the nonprofit, and well, let me call it feast and or famine in the nonprofit sector, because you have organizations like the health and welfare organizations that are seeing a dramatic increase in the demand for services, and they've also up till now seen an increase in funding, whether it be through some of the federal programs that have been out there, through the CARES Act, whether it be through increased donations, because people tend to give dollars when there's a distinct need within the marketplace. So, you see that when there is a natural disaster, a lot of money flocks to organizations that work within those natural disasters. Well, I think a lot of donors are looking at the COVID pandemic as something akin to a natural disaster. So there's been a lot more money that's been thrown at health and welfare organizations that are kind of working on the front lines and kind of working through this, all these COVID issues. I think, well, what you're going to find, though, is as we get, into 2022, deeper into 2022, a lot of the federal funds that were there are not going to be there on a go-forward basis. And I think you're going to start to see some shrinkage in some of the donations that have taken place to some of these health and welfare organizations. So you're going to continue to see a high demand for services, and the question is whether those dollars are going to be there to help pay for it. And then on the flip side, the famine side, you've got the arts and cultural organizations who have gone 2 years having to completely pivot, move from more of a physical organizations to more virtual. The dollars haven't been there. They've had to, close down operations, and it's been very, very difficult. And with all the starts and stops, the vaccine mandates and everything else, where they can't have as many people in the space. So even though they're starting to rebound a little, where the arts are starting to reopen, it's still been a bit of a struggle for them, and it will continue to be. Though there is kind of some positive news in that we do expect to see an increase in the number of people attending the arts in 2022. As I started to say, nonprofits need to stand on their own 2 feet in 2022. I mean, you're in a situation where, the organizations have gotten a lot of CARES Act funding, but a lot of that's now dried up. Some of the CARES Act funding that's still out there, if any of you haven't looked at the employee retention tax credit, something that you should definitely be looking at. If you've had a 20% or more decline in your revenues during the first, second, or third quarters of 2021, you can still apply for ERTC if you qualify. So something you should definitely look at, explore with your advisors, your accountants, whoever. But the ERTC is something that's still out there. You have 3 years to file for the ERTC. It may take 9 months to a year to get the cash in. But again, we're seeing, for some of our clients, we're seeing some big numbers coming through on the ERTC. So again, something you need to look at. You have to look at also, if you're going for ERTC dollars, how that interfaces with some of the PPP funds you've already gotten. And you also have to look to see if you have deficit funded programs. You have to be careful about getting ERTC funds under deficit funded programs. But again, it's something that you should definitely explore if you haven't already done it, if you are experiencing deep declines through 2021. Having said that, though, again, 2022 is a new year. Monies are being focused on the infrastructure bill and everything else. We're expecting to see, as I said before, some declines in the stock market, which could reduce other funding that's coming into the organization. Before the feds gave a bunch of money to the states were talking about pretty deep budget cuts. The question now is, as we move further and further away from those federal subsidies of the states are going to get back to where they were. And that could mean, budget cuts, whether it be in 22 or 23 or when, but, something to kind of look at. I know that the budget discussions are going to be happening over the next month or so. The question now is, can you get out there, push the advocacy buttons that you need in order to try to get some more meaningful contracts. I mean, if you think about it, we have a new mayor in the city, we have a new governor, at the state level. So you may have a more sympathetic ear than you've had in the past. And again, we talked about inflation, and there's going to be a rise in costs. So you've got increases in demand, you've got rising costs, you've got potential reduced funding. You don't have the federal support that you did with the CARES Act funding and everything else, and potential budget cuts. So 2022 or potentially 2023, depending on when all of the pieces kind of align, could be a tough year. So just something to keep in mind. I think when you're going through and you're doing your budgeting, I think it needs to be more than just budgeting as usual. I think you need to look at contingency budgets. What are you going to do in terms of what happens if there are cuts? What happens if we see some declines in funding? What cuts are we going to be making at an organizational level? And the other thing that I think is important is, I see it all the time, in the nonprofit sector, where organizations, they go and they create their budget, and their budget is a break-even budget. And I think it's time now that organizations stop thinking of, things in terms of, what comes in has to go out, and organizations really start focusing more on, this is a business, and businesses require reserves, businesses require growth and everything. So I'm a firm believer in creating some budgets that build in some level of profitability, so that you can build a little bit of a nest egg to take you through some downturns within the economy. You don't have to give away everything you bring in. We've seen overall a decline in volunteerism over COVID, because there hasn't been the same level of opportunity to give individuals meaningful in-person experiences. And again, I think you're in a situation where that needs to change a bit too. 66% of volunteers have said that they've decreased or stopped their volunteerism, during COVID. Now, one of the things that we've seen over the last few months of 2021, we've seen an uptick in volunteerism. So that's a plus. People are starting to come back, with the vaccinations and stuff, they're starting to come back a little bit. And that's important because, volunteers provide, much needed services that nonprofits can't always afford to pay for. In addition, volunteers, not only do they volunteer their time, but they typically also give money to organizations that they support. So it's, it's going to be, something that's important from that perspective. So again, as I said before, COVID has dramatically curtailed volunteerism, but individuals are still very much interested in working with nonprofits. The problem, again, there's been some level of trepidation because they don't want to kind of do things in person. So again, the question is, how do you provide meaningful volunteerism, maybe on a more of a remote basis? What can they do remotely? And if they are going to be doing things in person, how can you create a safe environment? There's been a push towards automation of some of the volunteer systems that are out there, so that you're in a situation where you can kind of track volunteers, track volunteer time that they have available, track projects and needs within the organization, and try to find better ways to align volunteers with the needs within the organization. So that's something that, if you do have a large volunteer base, that's something you should be looking at. The other thing to keep in mind is that, a lot of organizations, especially, organizations that are doing things like food pantries and stuff that relied heavily upon volunteers in the past. When that volunteerism kind of dropped off and stopped in many cases because of COVID fears, a lot of these organizations were kind of left and forced to close because they couldn't provide the services without volunteers. So again, something that organizations need to think about, what happens if that volunteer pool isn't there? What do they do? Is there now a requirement or a need to start paying for more of these services that in the past you've gotten volunteers to handle, so that you have a safety net in case, COVID outbreaks and things like that happen, and you don't have those volunteers necessarily coming in. The other thing is, again, there is a shortage of staff. People are looking for more meaningful and impactful employment. One of the things you might want to do is start talking to your volunteers about, if you have openings, whether it's something that, they might be a good fit for. Somebody did ask the question, how do you propose building in surpluses, within funding? And again, part of it's tough is when you have a lot of deficit funded contracts, through government, you really can't build it through the deficit funded contract. Really what you're looking to do, or what you need to do, is you need to have that balance of deficit funded and fee based, and you need to, look towards other forms of discretionary funding, whether that discretionary funding is coming in through entrepreneurial activities that you're doing, whether, you're running a business or something, and we're seeing, some increase in some of those types of things, whether it be increased fundraising. A lot of organizations that never relied on fundraising in the past have been forced to get into fundraising because they need to build those discretionary dollars. And again, I think some of it also comes back to talking to your funders, and maybe a little bit of a pushback. If you're really losing a lot of money on deficit funded, we're talking about building surpluses, but if you're losing money, and I have a lot of clients that are losing money on deficit funded contracts, there needs to be a kind of a discussion with some of the government funders to talk to them about the fact that, these contracts need to be more reflective of, what's happening in the real world. And, a lot of these contracts are things that started 10 years ago and have just rolled forward with minimal increases. And it's just not enough to cut it. And again, that comes back to organizations having to really, really rethink what they're doing from a business model perspective, and rethink, which contracts are the right ones for them and which ones they should maybe catapult. Okay, so what else is going on? Nonprofits need to think more strategically in 2022. Again, we've gone through the last 2 years where we've been very strategic in our thinking in terms of how we deal with COVID, how we pivot, how do we deliver services when, or with the increase in demand for service, how do we continue to deliver services with the resources we have? So we've done a very, very good job of maybe pivoting in terms of, and thinking strategically in terms of the short-term aspects of our organization. Now, I think, this is what the new world order looks like. This is, what we're going to be seeing going forward. We need to be flexible. We need to have, all of this stuff in place. So now I think, it comes down to a need to be more long-term, or bring in more long-term strategy and more strategic thinking on a go-forward basis. And 2022, I think, is going to be a very, very important year for long-term strategic thinking, and trying to figure out how, as an organization, we're going to really change our overall models. From an infrastructure perspective, what are we going to do in terms of making sure that we can handle the remote workforce that we have? I mean, we're so used to having one place where everybody goes. Now as we move on, we're going to have more of a fractured work environment, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place, from a control perspective, from a technology perspective, from a proactive and flexible policy perspective, from an investment perspective. How do we kind of deal with all of that on the infrastructure side? Because this is going to be what we're going to look like from, in the long term. We're going to have to invest significantly in technology. Technology is the platform that our agency runs on. When we look at technology, I mean, we look at, how we gather information. Information is going to be so important, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We talk about delivery of services. If we don't have the staff to be able to do everything, then we're going to have to rely more on technology to replace some of those areas where in the past we've relied on staff. Technology is getting so much better. We can do so much more with technology. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into maybe some of the trends that are out there from a technology perspective. So again, all of those things are going to be important. And in terms of an investment in technology, if we're lessening our investment in our building and space, which I think is something that we're going to start seeing in as leases start to expire, I'm not sure that organizations are going to be renewing with the same level of space that they have in the past. So I think you're going to see that since there's going to be less space, I think some of those savings that are happening in the space side can be invested in some of these areas, such as technology, leadership, staff, and everything else. We talked a lot about leadership already, and some of the importance of, or the significant importance of leadership on a go-forward basis in terms of keeping staff married to your organization. I think it's going to be very, very important for nonprofit organizations to invest in their management team and provide them with leadership training so that they go from being managers to leaders within the organization. Not only is that going to help you to build your C-level staff going on a go-forward basis, but it's also going to, again, allow you to help build them with their soft skills, keep them attached to the organization so that they can keep the other staff that work underneath them attached to the organization. You're going to have to invest a lot more money in training, and that's training at all levels. You've got the training, as I said before, of the leadership, but also of staff. With the new technology, there's going to be a need for training in the use of some of these technologies and increased automation and information harvesting and everything else. So training is going to be a very big area for investment in 2022. Information, again, if you think about it, business runs on information. The more information you have, the more effective you'll be able to be. If you have timely information, you can make more intelligent decisions. You can make more timely decisions. And that's going to be extremely important. Again, if I've got limited resources to work with, my decision-making process has to be very good in order to be able to maximize the potential I get out of those resources. And then, preparedness. You have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for almost anything these days. Who knows what the next curveball that's going to be thrown at you is. So, you need to make sure that you're prepared. We talked about earlier the contingency budgets and things like that. We need to make sure that we have policies in place. We need to make sure that we're ready for anything. So there's going to be some big investments going on in 2022. I think also and we've talked about this for years, but collaboration and partnerships are going to be so important as we move into 2022. As we move into 2022 or deeper into 2022. I mean, you're in a situation, we're in a situation where from a collaboration perspective, collaboration has to take place at all levels. We need to get more open communication with our funders, whether that be our government funders, whether that be our donors and stuff. We need to get deeper partnerships with our business contacts so that we're dealing with that. We need to have collaboration with other nonprofit organizations so we can kind of develop some full continuum of care, especially in the kind of the healthcare environment where you want to make sure that you have proper linkages. Because as we move more and more towards alternative funding like managed care and stuff, we need to make sure that we have in place ways that we kind of control that whole continuum. We do expect to see increases in mergers in 22. I know we've talked about mergers for years and we have seen some, but again, you're dealing with organizations that don't, a lot of organizations that are going to be coming out of the pandemic that are not going to be prepared. They're not going to have the technology in place to be able to handle this. They're not going to be able to find the staff that they need to be able to provide services. So you're going to need to find, ways that you can create efficiencies, and some of those efficiencies are going to come through economies of scale and organizations kind of coming together. So we do expect to see an increase in mergers in 2022. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a big issue for the last couple of years, and it's going to continue to be a big issue. As I said before, we need to not just talk the talk, but we need to walk the walk when it comes to DEI, and we need to make sure that gets fully integrated into everything that we're doing as an organization. Business models are going to become essential as we move forward. We really need to reassess everything we're doing as an organization. We need to reassess our current programs and contracts. Are they economically feasible? Are they enough to support the operations that they're supposed to be paying for? We need to reassess our delivery, our service delivery models. When we're dealing with kind of remote workers, how are we going to be able to deliver those services if I can't necessarily find the employees that are going to be able to provide that face-to-face direct service on a daily basis? Do we implement some technology that will allow us to monitor things when employees can't be there? So what is that new model? What is that new delivery service model going to look like? We need to reassess our impact on current services. What services will we provide? How will they be delivered? Where will they be delivered? Can they be redeveloped to be more impactful? And then if we can, how do we continue to measure impact? Now, impact and measurement of impact is still going to be an important thing. It's been important. It's been growing. But it's still, when I talk to a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we talk about impact, I think a lot of the impact measurements are still somewhat anecdotal. And for some of them, it has to be, but, we still need to try to find ways to be more effective in kind of understanding and measuring our impact overall. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the fundraising trends that are out there. I'm going to throw a bunch of statistics from 2021 at you, and I apologize that they're not on the slide, but so in 2021, fundraising grew by about 4.1%. So it was, I think, the 6th year in a row that there's been an increase in fundraising. 2022 may be a different story, and if we do see increases in 2022, I don't think they're going to be as high as 4.1%. Online giving grew by 12.1%. So if you don't have an online presence in terms of your fundraising efforts, you're doing yourself a disservice. 45% of worldwide donors are involved in monthly giving programs. Again, you need to make sure that you put in place, monthly giving programs. 41% of worldwide donors 41% of worldwide donors give in response to a worldwide disaster. And as I said before, a lot of donors are looking at the COVID pandemic as a worldwide disaster. They're treating it the same way. So as the pandemic winds its way down, and hopefully that will happen, you may see those dollars going to other sorts of again, worldwide disasters and away from the COVID. 31% of offline only first-time donors provide a donation in a second year. So if you're soliciting a donation and it came from like a mail campaign or some offline way of soliciting donations, about 31% of those donors who give a first year will actually give a second year. If you solicit that donation online, only about 25% of the donors who gave a first year are going to give a second year. So, I mean, if you kind of look at this in terms of things, less than 30% of all first-time donors do not give a second donation to an organization. There are several reasons for that. A lot of times, people give because someone they asked, someone who they know asked them to give, and they don't really have an affinity to the organization. So they gave because somebody asked them to give and not because they would have given on their own. The question now is, how do you cultivate those donors so that they become repeat donors? And that's going to be important. 30% of all annual giving happens during December, with about 10% of all giving happening during the last 3 days of the year. Female donors are more likely to give because of social media marketing, while male donors are more likely to give because of email campaigns and email messages. So again, if you think about who you're trying to reach and the audiences you're trying to reach. And then, as I mentioned before, a lot of your volunteers are going to give to the organization. 79% of all volunteers give to the organizations they volunteer for. So if you can build up your volunteer base, that also is going to build up your donor base. So those are just some kind of statistics thrown out there. Let's talk about some of the trends that we're seeing now within the nonprofit sector. Texting has become a much more important way of communicating than in the past. Text messages have a 99% open rate. And when you look at emails, only 28 to 33% of emails are opened. A lot of them go to spam or junk or get deleted. We don't have that spam junk necessarily within text messages. So there's a much higher open rate of text messages. Donors are 34% more likely to give on a mobile responsive website. So if your website is not mobile responsive, and I would also say that you want your website to be ADA compliant. But, and there's a big difference between, how you view a website on a computer versus how you view it on a mobile device. So if it's not something you've looked at as an organization, you definitely want to have your IT people or your website developer look at that and make sure that that's in place. A lot of the things that I see a lot of times is people do a good job of getting their message out there through some sort of medium, whether it be, mobile device texting or whatever, but then the ask isn't necessarily attached to it. So just make sure that when you're doing something that there's that ask attached to it. I mean, Wayne Gretzky once said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Well, the same thing happens here. If you don't ask, you're not going to get the money. So, you make 100% of or you lose 100% of the donations you don't ask for. Cryptocurrency, I think that's something that's kind of here to stay. In 2021 on Giving Tuesday, there was $2.4 million given in cryptocurrency, which was a 583% increase overall. And you're seeing more and more nonprofits are creating platforms that allow them to accept cryptocurrency. The number of organizations accepting cryptocurrency increased by 839% last year. It sounds like a big number, but there aren't a lot of organizations that are accepting cryptocurrency. The annual per capita income of a crypto user is about $111,000 a year, which is pretty much bigger than any city in the United States. So I know, people are constantly buying mailing lists to be able to go after potential donors, and you're looking at things in terms of zip codes and stuff like that. Well, another avenue to look at is, these crypto users, because they tend to be higher earning families. 45% of crypto users donated at least $1,000 to charity in 2021, which is significantly higher than non-crypto users, where only 33% of them. And in terms of that Giving Tuesday, that $2.4 million, the average donation made on that Giving Tuesday within that 2.4 was about 12,600. So the average size of a donation was 12.6. So you're seeing crypto users are providing much larger donations. So for organizations that haven't already set things up to allow them to accept donations of stock, to allow them to accept donations of cryptocurrency and other appreciated assets, something that they should really be thinking about, because they're missing out on stuff. I mean, one of the things you got to understand is that a lot of people did well in the stock market over the last couple of years. And a lot of people did very, very well in cryptocurrency over the last couple of years. So if you donate an appreciated asset like stock or cryptocurrency, you don't have to recognize the gain, and you get a full donation for the amount of the money you donated. That's a very important consideration. I actually had a client reach out to me, somebody who had made several $1 million on the stock market, and they cashed in, and they said, well, I'm pretty philanthropic, I want to make a donation. I'm like, well, the time to have done that was before you cashed in your stock, because you would have had a much bigger benefit if you would have done it that way. I mean, to put it in perspective, if I've got a stock that went from $500,000 to $1 million, so I had 100% gain on my investment. If I donate the stock, assuming it was a long-term gain, and I'm in let's say a 25% tax bracket, if I would have donated the appreciated stock, I would have saved $112,500, as opposed to if I would have sold the stock, recognized the gain, and then donated the cash after the fact. So, I mean, there's a big savings that comes into play with respect to donated of appreciated stock. So if you're not positioned to take advantage of that, you're leaving money on the table. Donors are also looking for ease. Donors want kind of ease of donation. So donors are really looking for you to have some sort of, trusted payment apps or digital wallets like Venmo, PayPal, Apple Pay, kind of attached to the platform that you're in, because they want to know that the donations are going to be safe, and they want to be able to kind of give fairly easily, especially if, they're giving through a text donation, and as it says here, 54% of donors prefer to give online. So again, how do you get one-time donors to kind of give more and come back? you need to develop more personalized relationship with your donors. I mean, if you think about, that, you want to let them know how the donations they're making are impacting the people that you serve and how you're utilizing the funds. I mean, think about the blood bank for a second. I donate blood as often as I possibly can. And whenever I donate blood, a couple weeks later, I'll get an email from the blood bank basically telling me where my blood went and how my blood was used. And that again it's important because I see that I'm having an impact, and I know that next time I get that email for a donation of blood, I'm going to be back at the blood center donating blood, because I know that what I'm doing is really having an impact. You need to kind of have that same mentality when you're talking to your donors. You need to drip on your donors all year long. I mean, you need to kind of let your donors know or understand where their funds are going, how they're being used, what's happening within your organization. And, as we're talking about this, there's kind of been a big increase in the use of video. More and more people want to watch videos. They don't want to necessarily read stuff. So that's actually great for you as an organization, because you can utilize videos as a way of getting your message across. Use short videos, give them the opportunity to meet some of the families you're working with or people that you're working with. Let them hear directly how the donations that they're making are changing lives. Send personal messages and stuff like that. I think all of that, in terms of helping to develop and build those relationships, are going to go a long way. Have those conversations with your donors. Take the time to pick up the phone and have a conversation with them. Make donors feel valued and important. And for those donors who haven't given in a while, consider reconnecting with them. So I think that's important. I mean, one of the things I talked about last year, when we did the trends report, I had kind of reported that I had made some donations to some nonprofit organizations, and I kind of reported back, what sort of responses I got from them. This year we did it again. We sent out about 20 donations at the end of the year to some nonprofit organizations, and the results were a little better this year than they were last year. I got 3 personal calls from the ED, board president of organizations. We got 6 handwritten personal thank yous from a person within the organization, usually, like I said, the executive director or a board member or something. We got about 8 standard thank yous, and 3 of them we're still waiting on responses from. So, while we did have 3 that we didn't get responses from, which is a little bit higher than last year, we did get a lot more personal touch, and hopefully we'll see, more contact throughout the year from the organizations that we supported. That's what donors are looking for. They want to know that, that the money is being used, and they want to feel like they're part of the organization. So what you want to try to also do is you want to try to make your donor requests, your asks, relatable and tangible, especially if you're doing a big appeal. People want to know, again, how their blood is being used, and they want to be able to kind of feel and understand that. So if I turn around and say, oh yeah, we're going to take the $10,000 you give and we're going to put it into the pool of resources we have within the organization and use it for operations, that doesn't mean anything. I don't understand how my 10,000 is necessarily going to change lives. But if I can say that, a $3 donation puts a book in the hands of a child, for $150 a month, I can provide housing for a family. A pint of blood is going to save 13 lives. All of those things are tangible. All of those things are relatable. And the more you can make your messaging tangible and relatable, the better off you're going to be. Some good news, we do expect most of the events happening as we get a little deeper into 2022 to be more in person, but they're going to be smaller. They're going to need to be remote aspects using technology. So we do expect the turnouts to be below pre-pandemic levels. We've seen that you need to still have some sort of remote aspect to the event, whether it be streaming the event live, whether it be online auction or online aspects. We're seeing even at the event, the aspect of touchless, where, even when you're at the event, you can use your cell phone to bid on items and stuff like that, rather than picking up a pen and writing things down. So that's, I think, you're going to see a lot more of that hybrid type stuff going on. Much more by way of text communication with your donors throughout the year and at events. And even that instant ongoing engagement that's taking place. When we did the New York City Imagine Awards this past year, we were doing little videos and announcing winners live and everything else and we were sending text messages and, throwing things out on social media as they were happening. And, again, that gets and builds excitement. And I think that's important. And then one other quick statistic is that the average age of a US donor is about 64 years old. So if you kind of think of things from that perspective, where a lot of the dollars are coming from the baby boomer generation, when you're communicating, you want to make sure that you're communicating the right way. Baby boomers aren't necessarily on TikTok. They're not using Instagram as much. They're more Facebook oriented, more direct communication oriented and stuff. So you want to kind of make sure you're targeting your audiences the right way. From a fundraising perspective, where are dollars going? Not a whole lot of change from in the past. 28% of dollars are going to religion, followed by education at 15%. Your human services are about 14%. Unfortunately, arts and culture is only at the 4% level. So you kind of get an idea of where dollars are going. And again, these trends are pretty, these percentages are pretty consistent year over year. So let's talk a little bit about technology trends. And as I said before, technology is pervasive in absolutely everything we do as organizations. And we have to make sure that, we kind of keep that in mind. And as I said earlier, there's IT equipment shortages. So we have to make sure that we're ordering things, and give ourselves a bigger time frame to get product in. And some of the things we're seeing is, nonprofits in the past have notoriously used older equipment and kept machinery for, longer than its normal life. And what ends up happening is some of that older equipment may not necessarily support some of the security updates that are taking place. And you may not be able to get newer machines as quickly as you have in the past. So again, something to think about. You really want to really understand what the lives of your equipment are. You really need to talk to your IT people and just make sure that the patches that are coming out, that your equipment can support those patches, because the last thing you want to do as you go through all of this, because with the increase in technology, you also have then the increase in cyber threats, and you want to make sure with all of the information that nonprofit organizations are bringing in and have within their IT environments, you want to make sure all that stuff stays safe. So you don't want to put any of that stuff at jeopardy. We've seen a tremendous increase in the number of attacks on nonprofit organizations. We've had clients that have had to pay out ransomware because of these attacks. And we're just expecting that to get greater and greater. It used to be that the cyber thieves would go after larger organizations looking for bigger paydays, but they found that a lot of the smaller nonprofit organizations have more lax environments, and especially with people working more remotely, that they've been able to get in and get smaller paydays, but get more of them because they don't have to work as hard to get into or get into the environments. So some of the stuff that that we've seen out there is the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology showed that 50% of nonprofits had experienced a ransomware attack. And if you think about it, you've got certain information that's out there that is critical that you maintain safety over. You've got donor information, you've got credit card information, you have HIPAA information, you have social security numbers of your staff and everything, and maybe of others. So there's all this information that's out there, and it's, unless you've got good cybersecurity in place, it's kind of easy picking. And like I said, 50% of nonprofits had experienced a ransomware attack. And then, one of the things that also is there is that there's an increased need for cybersecurity training, but 59% of nonprofits have kind of said that they're not doing it. So you have an increase in attacks on the nonprofit sector, and we all know that that's only going to stop if our staff are properly trained, but a lot of the nonprofit organizations aren't doing it. One of the things that we do here within our firm is we send out phishing emails to our staff. We subscribe to a service that sends out emails on a regular basis just to see who clicks on them. And if someone clicks on the email, and we also have software that allows us to kind of check an email to see if it is a higher likelihood of being a phishing email. But we're then looking at who's opening these emails that they shouldn't be opening, and we're training them on not doing it in the future and what they should be looking for and everything else. But it kind of constantly keeps things top of mind, which is really, really important to make sure that from a top of mind perspective, people are really taking cybersecurity seriously. So what other trends are we seeing? The Internet of Things. I mean, when the internet started, the internet started as a communication device between people so that people can communicate with each other. Now we're starting to see that, there's that communication between items, between increased communication with smart devices is what I was looking for. So approximately $6 trillion are going to be spent on the Internet of Things related solutions over the next 5 years. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money. You're seeing already expanded use of technology in service delivery. You've got things like, just some examples here, company Airbeam has wearable devices that allows people to measure air quality and pollution just through normal day-to-day operations, which then pushes that information down to advocates, and they can take that air quality stuff and advocate for change. You have sensors on water wells that monitor water levels and monitor maintenance that's needed within them. You have medical devices that are constantly monitoring a person's health. You have beds that take people's blood pressure and temperature, and so you don't have to go in, and a nurse doesn't have to go in and do that on a regular basis. You got voice activated assistants and voice activated smart homes where they can control temperature. It can control. So think about it can provide more independent living for people because I can kind of tell a smart device if I'm having a problem to call somebody, or there could be regular check-in, or I could have a warning if the stove has been on too long to remind someone to turn the stove off. So, there's a lot more that can happen within by the use of technology within your service delivery areas. From a fundraising perspective, something like the smart assistants, your Alexa at home or your Hey Google, 50% of people who own a smart assistant have used it to buy something. So if 50% of people have used their smart assistant to buy things, it's not a long reach to think that people could also use it to make donations. So, have you looked to see if, how you can get your organization kind of built into that network? Also, in terms of fundraising, it's just getting information out there. Content is always important. There's an organization called Save the Food, and what they've done is, their mission is to try to reduce food waste. And they made it possible for Alexa to ask for tips on food storage. So, you can ask Alexa for tips on food storage, which is brought to you by Save the Food. So, fundraising and all that stuff is going to be, really important. Even things like prospecting. If you're at if you have donors coming to a fundraising event or potential donors coming to a fundraising event, if they've communicated with you in the past via their cell phone, and you've got information with respect to their cell phone, and I'm not trying to get Big Brother here on people, but if you can then get notification that they're approaching, you could have your, approaching your event, you could have your board members or your executive director waiting for them when they walk through the door to personally say hello and welcome them to the event and everything else. So there's, a lot of ways that, the interconnectivity of devices is going to be very, very important for the nonprofit sector. You also have, many more digital screens out there that provide many more opportunities for getting the nonprofit's message across. I mean, you've got gas stations, you've got supermarkets, you've got digital billboards. All of these are platforms that are already in place that nonprofits could tap into. And while I don't think it's going to be big in 2022, I think within the next 5 years, you've got something like the metaverse, where fundraising and everything is going to kind of move, where the metaverse is going to be a big opportunity for the nonprofit sector as we move forward. With the fact that it's going to be harder and harder to find employees, increased automation is going to be extremely important. You're going to need to find ways to replace employees with technology, because we're just not going to be able to find employees to be able to do some of the maybe lower end tasks. And it'll also allow you to elevate some of the employees that you're using to do more menial labor, have them do more advanced stuff, and you can use technology to things like, automate communication with your donor base based on interest. So if I know that I have a donor who's interested in, and I can look at what campaigns that I've sent out and what a donor has responded to, I can then better target my messaging to that donor, and that targeting could be automatic. I could look and say, okay, they responded positively to A, B, and C, and I'm going to start now migrating automatically the messaging I send to my donors. I mean, that's if you think about it, I mean, that's what happens right now with pretty much with any of the social media that you're working off of. I mean, if someone knows that you're into hiking or into sports or into, whatever, you're going to get a bigger push within your social media content within those areas that you spend more time on. Well, you can kind of automate that also for your donor list, for your prospect lists, so that you can set up automated routines so that they understand gifting patterns, and you can modify your communication based on those gifting patterns. Even within the organization, in terms of your program management, it's you can create automated scheduling, automated volunteer. There's software out there that allow you to, like I said before, more effectively utilize your volunteers and marry your volunteers to things they need to do. And you can create, again, good communication platforms. Let's say you're an organization that creates a mentor-mentee environment. Well, you can kind of create a dashboard that provides instant information to the mentor about the mentee that they'll be working with. Things like, what are their interests, so that you can be in a situation where they can hit the ground running. So again, a lot of the technology trends could be very, very, even with respect to an organization that is looking to place animals with families. You can get an understanding of what a potential adopter, family is looking for, and you can kind of run through networks and find where those animals are. From a communication trends perspective, 9 out of 10 people on the internet use social media, yet 67% of nonprofits don't have documented social media strategy. Again, different groups use different levels of social media, but everybody's using it. You can see it's much more prevalent among the younger generations, 18 to 29-year-olds, 90% of them are using it. 30 to 49, 82%, 50 to 64, 69%, and over 65, 40%. Again, overall, it's about 90% overall. But, you're looking at this and, you need to set up a strategy. You need to figure out where your dollars and your efforts going to be. I mean, Facebook is still the biggest and most widely used across all age groups. It's more prevalent in the older age groups, but you still have 2.9 billion monthly users, active users of Facebook. In the younger generations, the 18 to 30-year-olds, TikTok, Instagram, those are going to be the bigger social media outlets there. And then, for those organizations that are actually utilizing social media, less than 50% of them are actually measuring their results to find out if they're being effective in their use of social media. We talked a little bit about smartphones before. We talked about, but there are 270 million smartphone users in the US, or there will be by the end of this year. And the average person watches about 30 minutes of video a day from their phone. And 57% of the people who watch nonprofit videos make a donation. So why aren't we pushing more videos out there? Why aren't we putting asks at the end of our videos so that we have that opportunity to bring in more dollars with respect to where people are watching it? As I mentioned earlier, 99% of all emails are opened, and 97% of them are opened within the first 15 minutes of receiving them. So you've got this great audience. If you can, if you have people's cell phone numbers, and if you can accumulate that data, you've got this great audience that you can push information out to with pretty high results that come from it. And then some of the workplace trends that we're seeing. I mean, one of the things I kind of mentioned before, but space needs to be more malleable. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing out there is, nonprofits aren't, with people working more remotely, you don't need to have all these offices. You don't need to have dedicated space. Space needs to be more multi-purpose and dynamic to meet the changing needs of the organization, whether that be on a daily or weekly basis. So if I have space that has partitions or movable walls, or space that I can use for staff to work in a safe environment, but then I can also quickly move it and break it down so that it becomes more of an open space for events or meetings. You're going to need to have multi-purpose space because at this point it costs about $5,000 per person per year for your space. And if you don't really need the space, you should really look to find ways to downsize that space, renegotiate leases, whatever you can do to save on it. Because again, a lot of nonprofit organizations have found that, certain aspects of their business can be done remotely, and they don't really need to have as much space as they've had in the past. We're also seeing, as I said before, more flexible use of space, hoteling, where, if we're going to be moving more to a hybrid environment, where you're going to have people working both remotely or in person, then people can share space as long as you consider that and you're keeping people safe. And that also means that there's going to be more and more of a need for increased disinfecting and cleaning. And with that also, you have to then keep in mind when you're buying furniture and equipment and stuff, that if you are going to be doing more in disinfecting, you need to buy stuff that's going to be able to withstand all of that. So I know I threw a lot of information at you. There is, this is all kind of a summarization of what's in our 2022 trend report. We do encourage you to grab a copy of it, read through it. There's a lot of good information. We really, really appreciate all of the hard work that went into it in terms of the feedback we got from our nonprofit resource hub partners, the feedback we got from the nonprofit sector and leadership and everything else. So again, there's a lot of good information in there. couple things that are coming up. The Nonprofit Resource Hub on January 26th is going to be doing a workshop on how to develop a fundraising plan for 2022. Do recommend that you do get sign up for it and listen to what Michael Bellavy has to say. He's a kind of a great speaker. And then we have our Cerini Nonprofit Connection coming up on February 8th, where we're going to have Simone talking a little bit about diversity and inclusion in the workforce. So again, we do encourage you to attend some of those types of things. We do want to thank our Nonprofit Resource Hub partners. Who without their support and help, we wouldn't have been able to do this. And I want to thank everybody for attending today. And if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. I'm just looking, there are a couple of little comments or questions that people threw out here. Our average donor is 65 plus, hard to get them to convert to mobile giving. Any advice on this with mobile giving becoming more and more prevalent in events, virtual events? Again, I think you have to kind of focus on your donors and focus where your donors are, and you need to communicate with your donors at the donor level. I think what you want to do is you want to use the mobile giving and all of that and social media to try to cultivate new donors to go along with the donors that you currently have in place. So I'm not saying that you're going to have to force donors to get to where you are. I think really what it comes down to is that, you need to get the donors to, you need to communicate with your donors at where they are. And then again, you need to find ways to reach new donors that are utilizing the different mediums and platforms. Any other questions out there? If not, again, I thank everybody for participating. Really, really appreciate this. And hopefully we'll be seeing you again in the future. Take care, everyone. So long.